It was a cold morning in Beijing when the silence finally broke. Outside the Ministry of Public Security's headquarters, cameras clicked like gunfire beneath a gray, merciless sky. Dozens of reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, breath forming pale clouds in the air. The tension was palpable, the kind that comes only before a truth too heavy to bear. Inside, a sealed report lay on the polished table of the briefing room, stamped with the red insignia of the ministry. The nation was waiting. When the news finally came, it would tear through China's entertainment world like a storm. Menglong's death had already become a national obsession. Once adored as one of the most gentle, unassuming faces in television, it seemed untouchable, a quiet star with an almost monk-like presence, whose calm eyes and soft voice made him feel like a figure from a forgotten poem. His roles in historical dramas had earned him fame, but it was his silence that captured hearts. He was never one for scandals, never caught in the usual circus of gossip. But fame, in the end, is never a shield. On a humid night in August, the tranquility surrounding his name shattered. At 2:37 a.m., police received a call from his apartment in Shanghai's Zhuhu district. The manager, voice trembling, reported that the actor was unresponsive. When authorities arrived, they found him lying near his bed, surrounded by scattered papers and the faint scent of alcohol. No sign of forced entry. The body was intact, except for a faint mark on his left wrist, a thin, bloodless cut that looked too deliberate, too symmetrical. By dawn, the Shanghai Municipal Public Security Bureau had cordoned off the area. Within 24 hours, they declared it a case of self-inflicted death due to depression. The statement should have closed the case, but nothing about it felt right. Fans noticed the timeline didn't match. Security footage from the building's corridor between 10 p.m. and midnight had mysteriously gone missing. The neighbors heard something that sounded like a scuffle, yet no such mention appeared in the official police summary. And most glaring of all, the autopsy, conducted under the supervision of the Shanghai Forensic Division, was completed in less than 2 days. Experts whispered that such speed was nearly impossible for a case of this sensitivity. The official autopsy, led by Dr. Luo Haben of the SMPD's forensic unit, did asphyxiation by hanging as the cause of death. Yet the photos released privately to the family told a different story. The marks on Yu's neck were irregular. There was bruising on his shoulders, as if someone had gripped him tightly. His mother, when shown the report, collapsed. "That is not how my son died," she whispered, her hands shaking as she clutched the papers. "He was afraid. He told me someone was watching him." That single statement spread across Chinese social media like wildfire. Soon, every corner of Weibo was ablaze with speculation. Posts titled, "The autopsy that lead and Menglong didn't take his own life" trended for days before being mysteriously deleted. But screenshots remained. Independent journalists began investigating inconsistencies. A doctor from the hospital, under anonymity, told one reporter some internal injuries were not included in the official file. The liver contusions, the defensive wounds, they vanished from the public report. It looked edited. The implications were explosive. If the autopsy had been manipulated, it meant someone within law enforcement was complicit in a cover-up. But who? And why? Attention turned to Yu's management company, Starlit Entertainment, a firm with deep political connections and a history of silencing unwanted noise. Yu had reportedly been in the process of terminating his contract, citing psychological pressure and creative restrictions. Days before his death, he had confided to a friend, "I think they were following me again." 3 days after the funeral, an anonymous source leaked an email chain between company executives and members of the Shanghai Public Security Bureau. The emails suggested coordination on public image control and handling of sensitive materials, though their authenticity was never officially verified. The timing of their deletion raised eyebrows. The phrase "confidential forensics draft" appeared repeatedly. It was enough to ignite national outrage. As more inconsistencies surfaced, Yu's family refused to accept the verdict. They filed a formal complaint with the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, CCDI, China's top anti-corruption body, alleging that the original autopsy was incomplete, inaccurate, and influenced by external pressure. Under mounting scrutiny, the Ministry of Public Security, MPS, stepped in. For the first time in years, Beijing ordered a secondary autopsy, a rare move that signaled one thing: The government no longer trusted its own local authorities. The second autopsy would be conducted at the National Forensic Research Institute, under the direct supervision of the Ministry of Public Security Forensic Department, MPSFD, an elite division usually reserved for terrorism and state-level criminal cases. The news sent shockwaves through the nation. For the family, it was a small sliver of hope. For the authorities, it was a test of transparency. On the morning the body was transferred, the streets outside the Shanghai morgue were lined with mourners. They threw white flowers onto the passing van, whispering prayers. A convoy of 3 black vehicles moved through the dawn mist, escorted by armed officers. The air felt heavy, as if the entire country was holding its breath. Inside the lead car, forensic officers in white coats sat silently, their faces lit by the glow of tablets showing chain of custody logs. Every second of the process was filmed, an act of both protection and penance. At the National Forensic Research Institute in Beijing, the atmosphere was unlike any ordinary investigation. The building, steel and glass, stood like a fortress at the edge of the city. Reporters were banned from entering. Only a select team of pathologists, sworn to confidentiality, would examine the body. One of them, a veteran forensic doctor named Dr. Zhang Kaiyan, told a colleague before the procedure, "This time, mistakes. No pressure. No politics. Just the truth." The second autopsy began on a Friday afternoon. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Outside, a storm gathered, rain drumming against the windows like distant applause. It took 14 hours. Every tissue sample was catalogued, every anomaly photographed twice. Nothing was left unquestioned. When the procedure ended, the report was sealed in a black envelope bearing the red wax emblem of the ministry. It would not be released to the public immediately. Verification and cross-analysis had to be completed. Still, the whispers had already begun. "Something," said one lab technician, voice trembling. "Something that shouldn't have been there." But what that something was remained locked away behind steel doors. In the days that followed, online speculation turned feverish. Hashtags demanding justice flooded social media. Truth for you Menglong, second autopsy. What are they hiding? Tens of millions of users debated theories. Was it an overdose disguised as suicide? A corporate cover-up? A warning to others who dared to leave the system? Even international outlets began picking up the story, calling it China's most controversial celebrity death since Zhang Zhehan. Within government circles, the mood was grim. A senior official reportedly told Cakesin Weekly, "If the ministry's findings contradict the local police, the fallout will be enormous." The Shanghai Bureau, once confident in its report, went silent. The director who oversaw the first autopsy was suddenly on medical leave. Others were quietly reassigned. At the end of September, the ministry announced a press briefing to clarify the findings of the secondary autopsy. The phrase sent shivers across the internet. Clarify. In bureaucratic language. Only one thing, contradiction. At dawn, the steps of the ministry building were crowded once again. Rain dripped from umbrellas, soaking press notes and microphones. Families clutched portraits of Yu Menglong, wrapped in plastic to protect them from the drizzle. Inside, the hall was linked by cold white light. Officials filed in, faces grave. When the spokesperson finally stepped to the podium, the flashbulbs ignited like lightning. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began. "For weeks," he said, "our forensic division has conducted a full re-examination under direct supervision of the Ministry of Public Security. The findings are conclusive, and they differ substantially from the previous report." He paused. The room held its breath. The injuries were not consistent with self-inflicted harm. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that follows a revelation too terrible to process. And outside, beneath the gray Beijing sky, the world began to tremble. The room erupted the moment the spokesperson finished his sentence. Cameras flashed. Questions collided. Voices rose in disbelief. "What do you mean? Not self-inflicted," one reporter shouted. Another demanded to know how such a glaring contradiction could exist between two official reports. The spokesperson raised his hand for silence. The damage was done. The silence that had once protected this case was shattered. For the first time since Yu Menglong's death, murder floated through the air. Unspoken but unmistakable. The ministry's briefing was brief, clinical. and mercilessly cold. The second autopsy, conducted by the Ministry of Public Security Forensic Department, had found inconsistencies inconsistent with suicide. In the diplomatic language of state investigation, that was the equivalent of pulling a trigger. The report, 76 pages long, revealed bruising patterns on the actor's shoulders and upper arms, signs of restraint. The wounds on his wrists were shallow but deliberate. Staging. And then came the most chilling revelation: trace elements of a sedative, midazoloprax, were detected in his bloodstream, a compound not registered in any prescription under his name. The first autopsy had made no mention of this substance. Outside the hall, rain poured over the waiting crowd. Fans clung to one another, sobbing. A woman screamed, "They killed him," while another fainted into the arms of a friend. On Weibo, the phrase "not self-inflicted" surged past 1 billion views within an hour. Inside state offices, the ripple spread like an electrical current, an embarrassment that threatened to ignite a political scandal. The ministry tried to contain the chaos with controlled statements. They emphasized further investigation, procedural review, and cooperation with local agencies. But nothing could stop the tidal wave. The Shanghai Municipal Public Security Bureau, the very institution that conducted the first autopsy, was now under suspicion. Whispers of corruption circulated in legal circles. Senior officers disappeared from public schedules. Days later, Cakeson Weekly obtained a copy of the second report. Its contents were brutal. It detailed post-mortem bruising inconsistent with hanging, subdermal bleeding along the collarbone indicating compression, and residual ligature fibers on the neck that did not match the material of the alleged scarf found at the scene. The report concluded, the physical evidence does not support death by self-suspension. The injuries suggest restraint and external interference prior to fatal asphyxiation. It was the closest a government document had ever come to accusing its own agency of fabrication. By the following morning, international media had caught on. Headlines read, "China's ministry contradicts police over star's death." BBC World called it an unprecedented reversal. Within China, comment sections overflowed with outrage. Yu Menglong didn't die alone, he was silenced twice began trending before censors could react. Behind closed doors, a storm was gathering. Ministry's investigative unit quietly detained 3 members of the Shanghai forensic team for procedural review. Among them was Dr. Luo Haben, lead pathologist from the first autopsy. His disappearance fueled another wave of speculation. Some said he had fled. Others believed he had been taken for questioning by the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. Days later, a leak confirmed the truth. Dr. Luo was in custody. The charge, falsification of forensic evidence. Revelation sent shockwaves through the legal system. Confirmed what millions had suspected, that the first autopsy had been tampered with. But the question remained, who had ordered it? Investigators turned their attention to Starlight Entertainment, the powerful agency Yu had sought to leave before his death. According to emails recovered from Luo's private server, executive at Starlight had offered financial compensation in exchange for swift and discreet certification of self-harm. The message was dated the night after Yu's death. Luo's reply was curt but damning, "Understood. Be handled before morning." The ministry's anti-corruption division launched an internal task force codenamed Operation Clean Veil. Forensic documents were seized from the Shanghai morgue. Surveillance footage showed 2 men entering the building at 3:11 a.m., hours before the official autopsy began. Their faces were obscured by masks. Their IDs untraceable. Still, the timestamp proved one thing: someone had tampered with the body before the first examination. Forensic reconstruction teams later confirmed that the lividity patterns on Yu's skin indicated he had been moved at least twice after death. One investigator described it as an artificially arranged scene, meant to mimic suicide but executed by amateurs. The truth was monstrous in its simplicity. Yu Menglong had not died by his own hand. He had been subdued, sedated, restrained, and suffocated. The act had been disguised, the evidence buried, and the narrative enforced by those who stood to lose the most if he spoke. Within entertainment circles, others turned to panic. Several of Yu's former colleagues suddenly deleted social media accounts. A producer who had worked with Starlight gave a cryptic interview. He wanted out. He wanted to start a company of his own. Wasn't allowed. When asked what she meant, she simply replied, "You don't walk away from power. You're erased from it. The ministry, now in full damage control mode, refused to comment further. But the public no longer needed official confirmation. The pattern was clear. A beloved actor had been murdered, and the machinery designed to protect truth had been used to bury it. Yet the human heart always seeks closure, and the family demanded justice. Yu's mother, appearing in public for the first time since his funeral, before reporters clutching her son's photograph, broke as she said, "They told me he was depressed. They told me to move on. But I could feel it, he didn't leave us. They took him." The video went viral within hours. The image of the mother demanding truth from the state became the most powerful symbol of the year. Across the country, candles were lit in memory of Yu Menglong. Students marched with banners reading, "Truth is not treason." The pressure became unbearable. A month after the ministry's report, an arrest warrant was issued for 2 executives from Starlight Entertainment, Chen Wenhao and Li Rong, on charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering. The revelation that entertainment executives had influenced a police investigation was unprecedented. The state media, once silent, began to shift its tone, calling the case a tragic lesson in moral decay and institutional failure. But justice, like truth, is never clean. Later, Dr. Luo was found dead in his detention cell. The official explanation, suicide by hanging. Few believed it. The irony was unbearable, another hanging. Their official report. Online, people began referring to it as the second silence. Still, the investigation pressed on. The ministry's forensic department released a supplemental report confirming that the sedative found in Yu's system could only have been administered intravenously. Injection marks had been noted in the original report, another deliberate omission. Evidence suggested the injection was delivered behind the left ear, hidden by hair. Whoever administered it knew exactly what they were doing. By winter, the government announced the completion of its inquiry. The findings were devastating. The original autopsy was declared invalid. The cause of death was officially reclassified as homicide by asphyxiation under the influence of sedative agents. The case was transferred to the Supreme People's Procuratorate for criminal prosecution. In a rare televised address, the Minister of Public Security appeared before the nation. His face was solemn, his tone grave. "This case," he said, "reminds us that even truth can be strangled by fear. But truth, like breath, will always find its way out." The broadcast became one of the most watched moments in Chinese media history. It marked not only the restoration of one man's dignity but the collapse of an illusion, the illusion that fame and silence could coexist without cost. The aftermath was chaotic. Starlight Entertainment dissolved under government order. Multiple police officials faced demotion or dismissal. Social media platforms introduced new transparency protocols for deleted posts. The entertainment industry was forced into a reckoning about exploitation, power, and fear. But for those who loved Yu Menglong, none of it felt like justice. At the National Forensic Research Institute, Dr. Zhang Kaiyan, who had led the second autopsy, in her personal notes, "We did not find peace in his death. We found the weight of every lie told to protect comfort over conscience." Her words were never published officially. They leaked months later, handwritten and scanned, spreading like poetry through the grief-stricken public. Yet, amid the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Fans across China began gathering annually on the anniversary of Yu's death. They brought white lilies and handwritten letters, lining the streets outside the studio where he had filmed his last drama. No one shouted. No one demanded vengeance. Simply stood, candles in hand, whispering prayers for a man whose truth had finally surfaced. The final chapter of the ministry's report, classified but partially leaked, contained one haunting line, buried deep in the appendix. The subject exhibited defensive wounds consistent with resistance, based on the condition of the hands and fingers. Likely he remained conscious during the act of restraint for several minutes before fatal asphyxiation. That single sentence broke the nation's heart all over again. Spring, the scandal had reshaped everything. Shanghai Public Security Bureau was reorganized under direct ministry oversight. Dozens of officers were reassigned or retired, and framed it as a systemic correction. But among the public, it felt like an apology too late. Foreign media called it a story that peeled back the mask of an entire system. Domestic journalists whispered that it was a miracle the truth had survived it all. In backrooms and tea houses, Reporters compared it to the great suppressed scandals of the past, and admitted this one had cut deeper. Because it began with art, beauty. Who only wanted to sing. Months later, when the final verdict was announced in a sealed courtroom, the surviving starlet executives received long prison sentences. The judge's closing words were simple: there are crimes of greed. And there are crimes of silence. This was both. Gavel struck, the lights in the courtroom flickered, whether from faulty wiring or divine coincidence, no one could tell. Outside, the winter wind carried the sound of weeping. Menglong's mother, now frail but composed, walked out of the courthouse holding her son's framed photograph. Behind her, the press swarmed. Someone shouted, "You feel justice has been served." She stopped, turned slowly, and said, "Justice is only real when it comes before death. My son's truth arrived too late." Her words silenced the crowd. Cameras lowered. For a fleeting moment, there was only the sound of wind rustling through the flags above the court's marble pillars. That night, Beijing's skyline glowed under a thin veil of mist. In the distance, a giant LED screen played reruns of Menglong's dramas, the same gentle smile, the same quiet eyes. To millions watching from their homes, it felt as though he had returned. Not as an actor, but as a symbol. Voiceover from one of his past roles echoed faintly. "Even if you bury the truth under stone, someday rain will wash it clean." In the years that followed, that line became his epitaph. At the National Forensic Research Institute, the black envelope containing his second autopsy report remained sealed in the archives, marked with a single label in red. "Case closed, truth confirmed." File number is F2947-2025. And beside it, in handwritten ink, single note from Dr. Zhang reads, "He didn't die for nothing. He died so we would remember what silence costs."